Sorry? How's this? Okay, welcome. So my name is Nilsson. I've been doing this little independent investigation of the MtGox incident for the last number of years. And I made some posts online about it. Some of you might have heard about them. So for this talk, I was going to go through a couple of things and cover sort of all of the bases. I'm going to go through a quick reminder of what actually happened in MtGox. I'm going to touch a little bit on what kind of blockchain analysis we used to find this stuff. Including how we. Oh my God, this is bad timing. There we go. Including what we had to do to find our missing pieces of data and what I've found so far. And I'm going to, since we're a bit short on time, I'm going to go through this at, pardon the pun, lightning speed. So as a starting point, MtGox, the main disaster of MtGox went down in early 2014 when the breaking news came out that suddenly withdrawals were slow to process. People were staging protests outside of the MtGox offices in Tokyo, demanding answers what happened to all the bitcoins. And before long, Mark Karpeles, the CEO of Bitcoin, declared bankruptcy. Also later in the news, back in 2014, there was a leak of some of the internal MtGox data, like deposit and withdrawal records. This leak was also analyzed independently by other analysts to discover the presence of a trading bot called the Willy bot. And later in the formal bankruptcy proceedings that got going later this year. And eventually also other analysts were brought in through the Kraken exchange. So behind all of this, at the same time, creditors were starting to get organized. Some of them with the goal of trying to rehabilitate MtGox, some of them with the goal of suing MtGox to try to get hold of their funds sooner, and others, more like myself, who were mainly trying to get access to investigate this stuff. So the couple of people who got together and formed WizSec basically shared the concern that this was kind of a new thing, new technology. Will this actually get investigated properly by law enforcement, et cetera, et cetera? And okay. And we figured that if we get together as a group, that's going to be a lot more effective compared to if we just sit around on our own. We figured that the few of us who got together, we had the skills to do it. We were on location in Japan, which was important. We were going to get it done, and we had a cool name. So the kind of special thing about MtGox is that it was kind of a first of a kind opportunity, thanks to the blockchain. You get a lot of this for free, already public by its very nature. If we, in addition to this, could just get this little bit of extra internal data about MtGox's internal wallet, which was a shared wallet, we'd be able to figure out what happened to the bitcoins, we figured. You can do some basic math on such records. For example, all the numbers, if everything is fine, all the numbers are supposed to add up. If you take all the money you put in and you subtract all the money you took out, you should have what's left. You should be able to reconcile any deposits and withdrawals that they actually happen on the blockchain. And if there's any mismatch, maybe that's the theft. So our objectives were to start off early by verifying anything that anyone else had done. We figured we needed to get close to the people who knew anything, who were involved with the disaster. We needed to get hold of better data and dig deeper. And with the end goal, of course, to try to hand over any findings we had to official investigators, like actual police and law enforcement. There was, of course, when you speak of approaching insiders and getting hold of data, there is, at the time, one obvious person we couldn't avoid getting in touch with. It was sort of also the most hated person in Bitcoin at the time. Mark Karplus, MtGox's CEO. So early on, we put on our best smile, went to see Mark, asked very nicely, "Hey Mark, can we get a copy of the MtGox database?" And he was, "No." Okay. Okay, what do we do then? Well, we have to do something. Well, we had some of the data in the meanwhile. We had some of the data leaks. We could probably try to reconcile that. I mean, the leaked data contained, for example, deposits and withdrawal records, including things like the date and the amount. And if you can just go through all of the blockchain transactions, you can try to match those up and find matching amounts, maybe you can match up all of the data. Problem is, there were literally millions of withdrawals and deposits, so this wasn't really doable from a manual perspective. So we had to do it in a sort of automated way. And at the time, the blockchain was still sort of manageable in size, about 30, 40 gigabytes. And our first approach, okay, write a small program, just scan through all of that, look for all of these target amounts. But this was kind of slow, depending on how much analysis we needed to do or what kind of query we needed to run on the blockchain. This could take anywhere from half an hour up to all night. So to speed things up, I actually went on a sidetrack and decided, all right, I'll try to make a blockchain index that's faster at doing these kind of analysis. So to do that, we need to take all of the blockchain data of all its various sorts and crunch that down into what's actually the minimum required things for what we're looking for here. And if you think about it, when you're looking for coin flows and trying to figure out what was there or what wasn't, you don't really need all of the metadata. You only need the basic relations between things. You have blocks. Blocks contain transactions. Transactions have inputs and outputs. Each input maps to an output. And it's also useful for all kinds of standard transactions to treat them by address and see that each output has possibly an address, and an address has a number of outputs where it has been used on the blockchain. Now, this is convenient for doing further analysis on it. So by doing this sort of stuff and just crunching everything down, trying to make the fastest index I possibly could, I crunched this down, and I was able to turn the 35 gigabytes of blockchain data into 5 gigabytes. Now this I can work with. This actually fits into my workstation. So with this in hand, I could go into actually reconstructing the wallets that were involved. The most important one being MtGox's wallet itself. So to do this sort of stuff, we look at address reuse, which is something that you should never do. You should try to avoid it as much as possible, because otherwise people like me can do this. If an address is used in multiple transactions, we can figure out that, okay, the same person has the key to that address, same person issued both transactions. In addition, the same person would have had all the keys to all the other addresses as well, and also they would have had the change address. And all of these would have belonged to the same wallet. And this is the goal for our reconstruction. If you can reconstruct the actual wallet, we can sort of see a more human-readable representation of the history, the financial history of this wallet. So once you do this, you can start looking at flows between wallets, and wallets are usually tied to people. So now we can start talking about economic entities on the blockchain, each entity having a number of addresses associated with them, and you can see how much money they send to each other. But you don't know who everyone is. You just see it's a collection of addresses. It's just a cluster of addresses. So to find out who it actually is, there are a couple of tricks you can do. One common trick that works surprisingly well is search the internet for posts like this. Help, I have problems with my deposit. I made this transaction to this exchange, and it didn't get through, and people will ask for help about this. And if you think about it, this actually provides us a lot of data where we can figure out which actual transaction are they talking about. And by stroke of luck, it happens to be a transaction in my very example illustration here. And by just copying over this kind of information, right, now you know that this transaction between these two entities was actually a transaction as referred to in that little forum post there. And if you keep doing this for years and years, eventually you get a pretty good impression of who's doing what on the blockchain. So around this time, we started having some results from this. We had clustered together about 2 million different addresses identified as belonging to MtGox, with some snags, because MtGox used a feature for sharing private keys, unfortunately, where users could upload their own private key. And this makes my kind of analysis really annoying. But ignoring that part, we were still seeing this kind of growing gap between what was supposed to be there and what's actually there. Because since we had the full record of deposit and withdrawals from them, we can easily calculate how much money was supposed to be in there, and we can check on the blockchain on these addresses how much money they actually had. But we still needed to get better data to clean all of this up, we figured. But in the meanwhile, we figured we had enough data on our feet to actually publish our first results. So we did this in 2015 and started publishing what we've found so far. And basically, we see these bitcoins going out of MtGox, and if we follow them further, they seem to be deposited to all these various places. And this is probably the theft, we figure. And by this point, we're starting to have some very limited amount of interest from people like the bankruptcy trustee or law enforcement actually starting to reach out and wanting to hear what else we find. And Mark, at this point as well, finally is starting to trust us a little bit more in that we seem to be handling it responsibly. But then around the middle of the year, I keep hearing these things on the street, like, "Oh, Mark, I hear the rumors among all my friends that police are preparing to arrest you." And Mark said, "No, it's no problem. I checked. It's just a rumor." Well, great. Okay, that was one of our primary sources. No problem. Oh well, we still have enough data so we can keep going for a while. Mark would actually end up spending a whole year in jail, but we could keep going, and we kept narrowing all the details down. And by 2016, we were pretty sure that actually it wasn't just this one theft; there were actually multiple thefts out of MtGox, as far back as the very beginning of 2011, which means that for almost the entire existence of MtGox, it was insolvent. It didn't have enough money to ever pay back the people who had deposited. Further, we had proof that after MtGox discovered its first insolvencies, it had started to trade those liabilities on its own exchange. And this is what later became known as the Willy bot, and that it was making up fake funds and trading them around to shift Bitcoin debts into dollar debts or vice versa. More interestingly, though, by further following all these traces, we were seeing that the coins that were stolen out of MtGox actually joined together with other thefts, like the Bitfloor theft or the Bitcoiniga theft or other thefts that happened back in 2012, for example. And we figured, well, this is interesting. No one's talked about this. This is probably quite new. But we still had to kind of wait, because by now we'd actually found some clues for a person of interest. And we knew by now that there were law enforcement operations ongoing that we didn't want to disturb. We didn't want to accidentally publish too early and scare someone off, and then suddenly, oh, there was no arrest because we went too early. So we kept investigating and waiting, and kept investigating and kept waiting. And then finally this year, about a month ago, this happens. Random piece of news that a Russian individual was arrested in Greece. So this guy is Alexander Vinnik, also known as WME. He was active online, and he was the guy we were looking at. As part of our investigation, as best as we can tell, this guy received over 500,000 bitcoins coming out of MtGox and all these other thefts. And he was the one moving them onto exchanges for selling them and laundering them. And also, the US government further claims that he was actually an administrator of BTCE, which took us a little bit by surprise. I hadn't seen that. We don't know if that's actually true. But what we found that actually led us to this guy, or if you'd like to call it the mistakes he made, is that this was back in the day, back in 2011, 2012. People weren't terribly advanced at using Bitcoin yet, so this guy didn't use any sort of mixing or obfuscation on his transactions, just plain wallets. All of these different thefts would be spent together so that we could further group the addresses clearly. He used accounts on the exchanges that were robbed themselves, like he deposited some of the coins back to MtGox. This is where we find all the account information because that data was leaked. And last but definitely not least, the guy used his real name online. Maybe don't do that if you're going to steal coins. So if following the flows coming out of MtGox actually is a reasonably elaborate picture, but what we found and why we can be reasonably certain that this does point to Vinnik is that this is coins flowing from wallet to wallet or clusters of addresses to other clusters. And all the red ones in the red group are addresses that also make deposits and withdrawals to MtGox from Vinnik's account. So all of those we're pretty sure belongs to him. Further, in the second box, all of these coins were stolen in the same way. It's, in that coins were moved out of MtGox by having possession of their private keys. And particularly the same set of private keys were used for all of these thefts. So we're pretty sure they're related and done by the same thief. However, I say thief and I say launderer for Vinnik because the launderer is not necessarily the same person as the thief. Our evidence shows that this Vinnik person took possession of the coins after they were stolen and he laundered them. However, that doesn't mean he was the thief. The thief is whatever person had the private keys. He could have sent them to some other wallet. And all we know is that Vinnik was the recipient of them. We can further sort of speculate that since we know that coins came from a lot of different exchanges, maybe it would be a bit weird for this one person to have robbed all of them. Or that would just make him really, really good in that case. But since whoever stole them, if the hacker is a different person, since he sent them directly to Vinnik, all right, that suggests that you must have had some sort of an arrangement there. You didn't just send it to a random person and then hope you got paid for them. So I mentioned that the private keys were stolen. How do we know this? Well, it turns out that if you steal private keys by copying the wallet and then run another wallet using that copy, that actually leaves a rather distinctive fingerprint on the blockchain. And this is because in the Bitcoin Core wallet, the classic one, historically used something called a key pool. And this means simply that out of the private keys that the wallet keeps generating, it has actually generated the next 100 keys in advance. And this is a safety feature so that if you take a backup and then you make a single transaction, the backup is not going to store that key unless you have a key pool feature. So you store a number of keys in advance, and now your backup is safe for the next 100 transactions before you start losing money. And this has been largely superseded now because we have deterministic wallets and other handy things. But with a key pool, basically, so every wallet contains a list of additional 100 keys that have been pre-generated but not used yet. So whenever you need to do a new transaction and you need to have a new address for the change, you take one of the keys from the key pool, use that for the change, and then you burn it, and you generate a new 100th address in the key pool. But if you make a copy, both the original and the copy is going to have the same 100 next addresses. So if you can somehow find all their transactions on the blockchain and look at their change outputs, for example, they're going to have the same sequence of addresses used until 100 transactions later when they actually properly split, and then they are two different wallets again. And this is interesting for a number of reasons, but because if you do this for MtGox's wallet, which by now we had reconstructed, it turns out that you can actually narrow down exactly when the copy of the wallet file happened, because the first transactions from the thief actually does have this exact same sequence of change addresses that were in the MtGox key pool. And we can narrow it down to say that, yes, the wallet file was copied exactly on September 11th, 2011, in the evening. Further, as a small consequence of this, while on the thief side, and the most common use for these key pool addresses was to generate a new change output, on MtGox's side, some of these were instead allocated to use as deposit addresses. Whenever you ask the wallet, okay, give me a new address, it's going to grab one of these. And MtGox did this a lot to do, okay, give me a new address that I'm going to use for this customer as a deposit address. So when they send money to that address, they should have their account credited. Unfortunately, here we have this thief that's using the same sequence of addresses as change outputs. So when the thief is doing their transactions, their change actually gets seen by the MtGox system as a deposit, which is bad because it's not actually new money coming in. It's MtGox's own coins being stolen, but MtGox further sees that as a deposit and credits someone for it. So this, of course, cost a lot of additional money for MtGox. But so what was actually taken in September 2011? Well, it was a hot wallet at the time that had about 100,000 keys in it. And while initially this was a big problem, but because MtGox kept generating new keys at a very high pace, being such a big exchange, eventually these 100,000 keys were actually just a very small portion of the total wallet. It reached a total of 1 million wallets, 4 million keys by the end. So, all right, let's go quickly through the theft. What actually happened when the thief was trying to take the coins out? Well, turns out there's a sequence of fairly regular transactions, except because these keys are being used less and less, he has to wait longer and longer between each transaction, because users will keep refilling them because some people's deposit addresses are compromised. But as time goes by, more and more new addresses get used instead. So what this actually looks at in the end is that the thief is actually using a couple of different wallets and switching between them at different times. But you can see that there's sort of distinct phases to it. It starts by sending all the coins to one wallet and then sort of switches over later. But overall, it's sort of the pace slows down over time until by the end, about 640,000 bitcoins have been stolen this way. So at this point, let's jump back a little bit and take it all from the beginning, because what our findings show for the entire story of MtGox is that if this was the only theft, all right, that would have been still catastrophic, still bad, still lethal. But wait, there's more. So back in 2010 is when MtGox was first founded by Jed McCaleb. He later sold it to Mark Karplus in 2011. But turns out, through some earlier theft, it was already insolvent when it was sold. And in addition, after this, there were numerous incidents. So over time, the Bitcoin holdings of MtGox varied quite rapidly. And you can see this thing slamming into zero quite a couple of times. Yes, it did that. But more interestingly, the main theft, the one that actually took these 630,000 Bitcoins, that's just that tiny amount of red you can see there. All of the 630,000 Bitcoins were leached out of the holdings that existed in that one wallet, because MtGox used multiple wallets. This is why you have this nice multicolored graph. You can also know that by the end, you have an offline wallet there with about 200,000 coins in it. This is what was famously found by Mark Karplus when he was doing spring cleaning or whatever. But you can see that, yes, it actually was just sitting around since 2011. Kind of weird. Unfortunately, all right, this is what MtGox actually held. What was it supposed to hold? If you look at the customer balances, well, quite a bit more. So going through and actually looking at what actually happened then, in addition to the big theft. Well, back in January 2011, rookie mistake, unsanitized input in your withdrawal form can inject your own XML code, put in a different amount that would actually get sent to your account compared to what's going to be going to be taken off your MtGox account, and boom, $50,000 is gone. Never came back. All right. A couple of days later, second exploit. When you withdraw something, you probably should check that you haven't put in a negative number. So yeah, some guy wisened up to this. Oh, I wonder what happens if I put in minus $100,000, and boom, I got another $100,000 on their account. This one seems to have gotten fixed, and all the accounts reverted back to their original values without losing any significant money. All right, next up, kind of a bigger issue. Just before the MtGox was supposed to be handed over to Mark, entire hot wallet gets stolen and emptied out. 80,000 bitcoins, boom. That's the first time the graph goes to smashes into the ground there. Interestingly, these coins were just stolen, and then they've just been sitting there. They're still sitting there today. Maybe the thief will remember now that I'm having this presentation and suddenly move them. Oh, right. It was with these two incidents that the idea to run this sort of an obligation exchange to swap liabilities back and forth actually formed. So this is the seed for all of the willy internal manipulation stuff. All right, next up. 2 months later, while doing some maintenance, most of the customer bitcoins are held temporarily on a network drive accessible from the internet without any protection on it. And someone notices, and boom, it's gone. It's the second time the graph goes. Now, we got a bit lucky here because, or depending on how you look at it, because the thief didn't actually plan this theft, it seems. He used his normal wallet and whatnot. So there would be a lot of traces there if you wanted to go after him. So he was a bit nervous, so he actually contacted Mark and said, you know what, I can give you the coins back if you just promise not to investigate. Well, okay, well, I didn't promise not to investigate, so I'll get back on that. All right, next up. This is the first hack that actually is publicly known, and it happened in June, when someone gets into an admin account on MtGox, plays around with customer balances, and smashes the market straight into zero. The price hit rock bottom. In addition to that, they fiddled around and was able to actually withdraw 2,000 bitcoins as well. But apart from that, all right, this is mostly public knowledge, so not terribly important in the greater scheme of things. Next thing, not so much an incident, but an interesting business choice by MtGox. MtGox needed a European expansion and needed to have someone with a company on the ground in Europe. And there was this company called Bittermat run in Poland that had suddenly collapsed after they accidentally wiped their private keys by deleting their VM. And Mark figured that, oh, this sounds like a great business opportunity. And he offered to absorb the entire company and take over their debt. So he took on another 17,000 bitcoins of debt. Now, this wasn't a crazy amount of money back then. This is still summer 2011, so this is still just a couple of tens of thousands of dollars. But still, it didn't help, considering where the price went later. So, going onwards, next up, just shortly afterwards, in September, someone gains access to the database of MtGox. They apparently hacked into the server. They're able to make changes to the database, and boy, do they make changes to the database. They make new accounts. They inflate their own balances. They seem to withdraw a ton of cash, or bitcoins, I'm sorry. And then they also are clever enough to delete most of the logs. So this was kind of tricky to uncover that it actually happened, but it seems like these guys got away with about 77,500 bitcoins. So the tab is starting to rack up already, and we haven't even gotten to the main theft yet. So after this is like I said, this is the main theft that I was mentioning earlier with the hot wallet being stolen, and this is the second time the entire hot wallet is stolen. For some reason, they then held off starting to actually steal anything until a couple of weeks later, but this is the big thing. This is over 630 bitcoins, 630,000 bitcoins stolen, and yet for some reason, it doesn't seem like anyone noticed. This is the most perplexing bit, in that why would you have no monitoring whatsoever? Why would you never check your holdings? But there's still a couple of smaller ones. Like I said, incorrect deposits made by the change output when the thief was stealing the bitcoins. Actually, even more bitcoins went missing because of bad accounting in MtGox. So some 48 lucky people got some free bitcoins deposited to their, or credited to their accounts to the tune of about 45,000 bitcoins. Some of that we were able to get back, but about 30,000 probably lost, because most people, if you suddenly get a big amount of random money in your account, you're not going to go report that. You just go withdraw, withdraw, withdraw. Next incident, I can't believe it keeps going. This one was also public, but in October, Mark had switched to a new wallet, and it had a bug in it that some transactions, for a brief amount of time, forgot to serialize the public key it was going to send to. So I just sent it to an empty output, something that can never ever be spent. And this cost another 2,600 bitcoins. And the great irony is that apart from this incident, there really wasn't any thefts of bitcoins after this point. After the switch to this new wallet, there were no compromises. It seemed that the new system was safer than the old standard one. Apart from that. A couple of more things that also further damaged MtGox. US law enforcement got involved and seized money because they were not authorized to be a money processor in the US. About $5 million lost. They had a dispute with CoinLab, where CoinLab was supposed to be a licensed money processor in the US, but the deal went south, and CoinLab has allegedly refused to return some of the funds it received in advance. So this is another $5 million lost. Finally, the big one that also adds a bit to the tab would be Willy, the Willy bot, or as Mark himself calls it, the obligation exchange. And this was his attempt to dig out of his hole. But as frequently happens when you dig in a hole, you just dig it deeper. In theory, yeah, sure, if you're a genius trader and you can make every right decision, you can probably fix your insolvency and everyone would be happy. But Mark wasn't a genius trader. And in the end, we were $50 million more in the hole and another 23,000 bitcoins lost. So by now, I mean, coming up on today, I mean, the total tab for funds lost is pretty impressive. $60 million and over 860,000 bitcoins lost. Although interestingly, and finally, once you start adding the numbers up now, there were supposed to be about 950,000 bitcoins in customer balances. There was supposed to be another 100,000 bitcoins just held in the wallet as company revenues. And we know there were about 200,000 bitcoins left when the company collapsed. Oh, it's actually finally, numbers are starting to add up. This never happened before. But with all this huge number of compromises, this was, of course, never survivable, although everything was made worse because they never went public with any of them. Even the ones they knew about, the early ones, if they'd gone public, people wouldn't have put their money in, probably. And then the damage would have been contained simply because it would have exploded while MtGox was still small. Would that have been a good thing? I mean, MtGox was also a big driver of the economy back then. Well, fewer people would definitely have lost money. So what were the big failures? Well, disclosing is the big failure. If you're in the hole, you should probably stop digging. And knowing early on that there was this secret, that there is a lot of bitcoins missing, Mark was not incentivized to have proper monitoring. The only thing monitoring would have discovered was that, yes, there are bitcoins missing. Why haven't you told anyone? So it was in his best interest to not check how much he had, not have any automated monitoring system, because then his employees would find out exactly, etc., etc. Unfortunately, all of this does is, of course, massively increase your risk, because you won't notice if someone is stealing your bitcoins. This is which happened. So is there anything still left to do in the investigation? Oh, yes. I am, unfortunately, just one man. There are still lots of loose ends. for example, the 2,000 Bitcoins stolen out of the June hack, that's still moving on the blockchain. Someone could trace that if you wanted. You should. Should we go after the guy who stole 300,000 Bitcoins but handed most of it back? I don't know. Is there actually a real connection with BTC? Facts are sort of up in the air on that one. And there are some other traces as well that actually have some clues to how did they actually steal the Bitcoins and what was actually done by hackers as opposed to our Russian money launderer friend. So there's still lots left to do if people are interested. But for now, I will just take some questions if you have any.
Thanks a lot. I think everybody loved the talk. But because we're a bit out of time, we'll take just one question. And I think we have one here. So make it good.
So I was really surprised to hear that MtGox was detecting some change addresses as deposits. So was the hacker stupid enough to send coins back to keys that were also still held by MtGox?
No, so this is the thing. The hacker would have just started his own wallet on the same wallet file. So from the hacker's point of view, he is just sending normal transactions. And then his wallet is selecting an address to use as change. Normally that's a new address, a fresh address, but since he has a wallet that's copied from MtGox, this is something MtGox has already used and allocated, in this case, as a deposit address. So the thief doesn't know that it's going back to MtGox.
Right, so he was a bit dumb because of that, right? I mean,
well,
theoretically, MtGox could have taken back the coins.
Yes, it was still spendable by MtGox. Had there been alert, they could have just taken it.
Yeah.
Let's do one more because that was a short question.
Hi there. My background is in design, not security, and I decided not to put any money into MtGox because of the way they indented their CSS. As a relatively non-technical cryptocurrency enthusiast, what are the things I should look for when I'm evaluating a new exchange? Are there any ways in which you start to look at an exchange and think through whether you want to put your money in there?
Well, these days we have learned a lot, and one of the things that we've seized most upon is the idea that the blockchain is public, and we should be able to do public audits of things. Companies that are not prepared to even try to do that, I think that's a bit of a warning sign. I think there's really no good excuse not to be upfront and try to be transparent about your actual holdings. If you have an exchange that is transparent, and you can verify that they actually hold this number of Bitcoins on the blockchain, that's at least a big step in the right direction for being able to trust these people, or rather, not have to trust them.
Okay, thank you very much. So next up is Patrick.
Awesome. I'm the sorry guy who has to follow that amazing talk. Let me.